This is everything you need to know for the third expansion of EverQuest, the Shadows of Luclin. There'll be timestamps so you can skip around as needed. Chapter 1. What are the global changes from Velius to Luclin? A lot changes. So the level cap is still the same at level 60. But there's now a reason to group again on your max level characters. Luclin adds a new alternate advancement system. You farm XP to earn AA points, and then you spend them to get new abilities and make your max level character even stronger. There's now a reason beyond raid logging to play your max level characters again. A new race is added, the Vashir or Cat People. They are a neutral faction race with no significant bonuses over other races, and a new class is added called Beast Lord. They are a monk shaman hybrid. They are a melee class, have a strong pet, and strong support buffs. Norath's Hidden Moon of Luclin is unlocked. It adds a whole new leveling path from 1 to 60 if a young Vashir is so inclined to stay. This expansion adds a new zone called the Bazaar that makes the Common Lands Tunnel obsolete. So all interplayer buying, selling, and bartering of items will now take place in the Bazaar for the rest of the game. You can bring up the auction window by typing in /bazaar or /baz. Luclin also makes travel across Norath faster for non-porters. You access Luclin by going to one of the giant Combine spires on every continent. The spires are located in the Dreadlands, Greater Fadark, North Karana, Great Divide, and Toxulia Forest. You hail this NPC wizard sitting there to get a gem. That gem is required to port in. And every few minutes or so, it'll port you up to the Nexus, the first zone of Luclin. From the Nexus, you can quickly get back to any of those mentioned spire locations on Norath, a fast travel system. And another thing to note is that buffs don't lose any duration, they don't expire in the Nexus and the Bazaar. 2 last global changes for Luclin left. So mounts are added. You can acquire them in various different ways. Some are bought in game, some from the pay-to-win store, and others are dropped. But what's important to know is that when you are on a mount, your health and mana regeneration rate, it's just like you're sitting, much, much faster than if you're standing. And you don't get mob aggro like you were sitting. They also increase your run speed to varying degrees that'll tell you how fast it goes. Basically, every class except Bard is going to want a mount. The last major change of Luclin was the addition of new character models. Now, no matter where you play official EQ, you've already had access to them, but this expansion was historically when they were added. If you don't want to look goofy on a mount, I would use the Luclin models over the original ones. Oh yeah, and this expansion adds the ability to dye your armor different colors. Chapter 2. What new abilities do classes get? A lot of things get fixed in the Luclin expansion. There were many holes in some classes' ability kits that are finally fixed in this expansion. Tank classes. The only significant change for warriors is they get an AoE taunt ability from alternate advancements. Shadow Knights get an aggro generation buff, a new aggro rip spell, a mount you can purchase with AA points, and the ability to bash with two-handed weapons now. Paladins get the AA mount too, two-handed bashing like SK, but unlike SK, they also get a AA stun that's mana free. Lay on Hands turns into like a perma complete heal for half a minute. And a passive proc they get for huge damage against undead. Paladins finally get their aggro spells fixed. So they got the AA stun that's mana free, and then they get new low level stuns that cost so little mana, and they are amazing at ripping aggro. They're finally on par with what Shadow Knights have been able to do since Classic. This last thing is not a spell or AA, but a very important item. There's a new weapon added exclusively for clerics and paladins called the Divine Hammer of Consternation. Many raid mobs have a mechanic called Rampage. The first person to aggro the raid mob, or basically the first person on the aggro list, will continue to get hit until the fight is over. And this is even if you're not targeted by the raid mob. If you're on Rampage, you will get randomly hit no matter what. So you kind of need 2 tanks now. You want a warrior to main tank, of course. They have the best defensive abilities. But now you need a second tank to run in first, get aggro first, so they get on Rampage. This is where Paladins come into their first major role in raiding. They become the best off-tank for Rampage. Paladins are beefy enough to take the hits, and then when they proc invulnerability from that hammer I spoke of, they take no damage, so they are the easiest Rampage tank to heal. Healer classes. For healers and buffers in general, Luclin makes buffing much more convenient. Many new buffs are added that are group-wide, so you don't have to toss out individual buffs over and over and over on every group member. That was just terrible. And a new AA is added for everybody called MGB, or Mass Group Buff. You can cast one spell and it'll buff everybody in range. So for instance, a cleric can MGB their hit point buff and it'll hit an entire raid all at once. Clerics get new heal over time spells to fill in gaps for different level ranges. Clerics get AA abilities that allow them to temporarily invulnerability themselves and someone else. They get an emergency 100% res that brings someone back at full health, no res sickness, and all their buffs intact. This is clutch for raid tanks when they die. And many more AAs, but those are the most important. Shaman get a new group-wide run speed buff that has some attack stat added. It becomes the default run speed buff that all melee DPS want. And like I said earlier, Shamans benefit most from many of their buffs becoming group-wide now. Shamans get an AA cannibalized. It differs from the spell versions they've been using because it instantly turns a large amount of health into a large amount of mana instead of these smaller conversions. And lastly, Druids get some new heals that finally bring them up to par with Shaman and Clerics. They get an AA group evac, but that's kind of it, sadly. Nothing else is worth mentioning. Caster DPS. Mages get a bunch of new summon spells for focus effect items. So I forgot to mention this earlier, but Luclin is when focus effects on gear become active. This mostly affects casters. Some pieces of gear have effects that say reduce how much mana heals cost by like 25%, reduce the mana cost of buffs, make nukes and dots hit harder, make it so you can cast from farther away, etc., etc. Having the right focus effects is critical for optimizing your play as any caster. So mages can now summon some of those focus effects if, say, your gear doesn't have it. You really need it. Mages also get a new Mod Rod spell that hits everyone in range. It can hit an entire raid. And all the major pet classes get new AAs that give greater control over how their pets act. They'll only attack when you tell them to, which is useful for raids. Mages get a new AA that removes the need for reagents to summon their pets. They no longer need Malachite. And they get an AA that gives them some extra damage on nukes plus mana regen. Necros get new spells that can slow undead targets, a mana tap that gives mana to the group once it expires. AA-wise, they get an undead mez, a way to lower their aggro generation, a corpse summon ability, and a mega nuke that converts some of their health into damage. Wizards get a spell to summon a familiar pet that boosts various different stats and the damage of their nukes. They get an AA group evac, an aggro reducing AA, and a nuke that consumes their mana bar to do massive damage. Melee DPS. Rangers. Now, I used to put Ranger as one of the tanks in my past guide videos, but this is the expansion they finally get an identity. Rangers become less of a tank moving on to more of a strong DPS class. They now exclusively do damage with bows and arrows from very far away. And the benefit is it's very consistent damage, requires no mana, and they can avoid all the raid AoEs. Rangers get new quick cast snares to quickly rip aggro or stop fleeing mobs. They also get buffs to boost their ability to hit with bows and arrows, but the AAs are what change everything. With Endless Quiver AA, you now have infinite arrows. You just equip one really good arrow and you're perfect. They get 2 AAs that boost base archery damage and how hard the critical hits go for. So they go from a mediocre DPS class to basically top 1 to 2 on raids. Amazing turnaround for them. Beast Lord is the new class added. Like I said, they're a monk shaman cross. They melee DPS, use a strong pet, and have some support buffs / debuffs. and Beast Lords become the third class to have a mana regen buff that everyone wants, beyond what bards and enchanters can do. AA-wise, they get a temporary group buff called Paragon that massively increases health and mana regeneration for half a minute. I think it can go raid-wide if you use MGB on it, but I'm not sure. Monks get new AAs that let them push mobs, which can be very useful on raids for positioning, a quicker cooldown on Feign Death, and a self-cure. And lastly, rogues get AA abilities that let them semi-backstab from the front, and an ability to drop all aggro and pop invis. Crowd control. Enchanters. So we got to talk about their new mana regen buff called KEI for short. Their old mana regen buffs only lasted about 30 minutes. This new version lasts for 2.5 hours. It can be further boosted by AAs that extend buff duration. Another bonus is that it can be mass group buffed to hit an entire raid all at once. So this is the start of where druids and wizards no longer get tips for porting people. Enchanters often get tips now for handing out this new long duration mana regen buff. AA wise, they get an instant click to restore a lot of mana, a decrease to aggro generation, and a permanent charm, but it'll only work on mobs that are level 46 and lower. Last class, bards. Bards get new mez spells that finally fix the gaps where they couldn't mez squat before. They can now mez almost as good as an enchanter. They get a new run speed song that lasts 2.5 minutes instead of a few seconds. And lastly, they get new resist songs that can affect everybody in range, not just the group. Raid-wide resist songs. AAs, they get boost to song strength and how far range the songs extend to. Chapter 3. What quests are good? Again, the first quests you should do are the Anniversary Tower missions in North Row. This stuff is best in slot, if not near best in slot, for many classes. For the effort required, it's well worth it. Some other quests that were great, one was the Earring of Solstice. It was a quest that involved getting a bunch of trade skill items. You would turn the gamut in and receive an earring that had 1 mana regen on it. Many classes wanted that, but it's obsolete because of tower gear. There's a quest to get an 85% weight reduction pack called the Relic Pack. And the last one I'll mention is the AHR neck, the Aten Ha-Ra neck. When you kill the end raid boss of Luclin, it drops an item that you can turn in for the best in slot neck piece. The necklace has 8 hit point, 8 mana regen, a boost to it, the attack stat, ultra vision. I think this is by far the best item in Luclin. Nothing has more mana regen on it. Chapter 4, Leveling. Now what zones should you level in? This expansion adds a whole new leveling path from 1 to 60, as with the addition of the vast shear race. I'm just going to touch on the most popular places people go to group. A lot of people will choose to go to Paludal Caverns from 5 to 25-ish instead of Unrest now. I think it has a better EXP rate. Dawnshroud Peaks is a popular outdoor zone to go from 25 to 45-ish. And then lastly, Greek's End is another option for players near max level 60, where they can grind out AAs beyond, say, Velx, Tardok, or Seblis. Chapter 5, Accessing Locked Zones. There's 2 locked areas in Luclin, and you have to get access to these if you want to raid. Mandatory. Now, most steps can be completed in a small group or even solo. The first major raid is against the Emperor and SSRA Temple. To get access to the throne room where he is, you have to do a key quest that's contained within SSRA, within the zone. You get a pouch from names in the basement, and then 3 items from names scattered across different floors. And you combine the 3 items in the pouch, and bam, you get the ring. It'll give you access to go to the Emperor room, the top room. And rewind a bit, while you're in the basement farming, be sure to pick up another item. It's called a Strange Green Metal, and it drops off any of the named skeletons down there. As well, there are Shishar weapons that'll drop occasionally throughout the zone. You'll need one of those too. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is that the only way to hurt the Emperor, the end boss of SSRA, as a melee, is to have a special Bane weapon that is crafted when you combine that Strange Green Metal and a Shishar weapon in a forge. Now, Shadow Knights are the only exception to this, because I think they have the Green Mist sword that can hurt them, but still, Now, after you kill Emperor, you'll get a drop that's needed for the key to the real end raid zone of Luclin, Vexthal. To keep this video short, I'm not going to go into all the detail, but the gist is that you farm for several items called Lucid Shards, I think 10 of them, from various mobs across Luclin zones. One zone you have to hit for a Lucid Shard you need to know about is called the Gray. It's the zone right outside SSRA Temple. The atmosphere is completely removed in the Gray, so you need some form of enduring breath to survive there. Anyways, you get a container, you throw all 10 Lucid Shards in with a drop you get from Emperor, and bam, you got your Vexthal key. You gotta get access to this zone. There are amazing drops in there, clickies that stay useful for the entirety of the game. If you want a more in-depth guide as to how these keys work, I will leave a link to 2 playlists I made for getting those keys in the description and comments. One thing to note is the keying quests have been made significantly easier from a 2021 patch. Instead of the Lucid Shards only dropping from specific mobs, they can drop from anything in the zone. The last thing to note is a mid-tier raid zone in Sanctus Saru. So the end boss is in this pyramid that has no doors to enter. So to get into that pyramid, you need a ring that has a little port on it. It'll port your entire group in. And otherwise, for melee to hurt the end boss, it's just like the Emperor and SSRA. It requires a Bane weapon of itself that's completely made through trade skills. It's a bit harder to get. Chapter 6, How to Get Geared. So how does gearing work in Luclin? Not many visible slots change. This expansion replaces most non-visible slots. The overarching changes are that this is the first expansion that makes mana regen plentiful on gear. It's very achievable to get the mana regen cap of 15 on gear. And Luclin also adds a boatload of amazing clickies that you'll use forever. A lot of them only dropping in Vexthal though. I'll go over a few of the most valuable items. This expansion adds the first clickies for shrinking yourself. Many raid guilds require people to have some form of shrink, so it cuts down on how huge all the character models are. So you'll need to get one of these. The only one that doesn't require raiding is from a zone called the Deep, Named. It's a self-only cast. The next 2 shrink clickies are from Vexthal. So there's one that's Shaman exclusive. That's just a 1 cast and it shrinks everybody in the group all at once. And then the other is a bracelet that every class can use that's really fast, and you can click it on other people to shrink them if you want. There's a new pet focus item that's some gloves dropped from Vexthal. It boosts the strength of your pets. There's some clicky melee procs to help tanks hold aggro. A free Mallow necklace for shaman and mages. Human illusion, skeleton, and fire elemental items in Vexthal. And to round it out, there's an Invis mask. That's the first one available for many classes, as well as an Invis versus Undead earring that everyone can use. These are only a few of the clickies. There's so much more. Chapter 7, What You Need to Know About Raiding. The barriers to entry are higher now. You'll still need to be max level 60, but fortunately most guilds don't care about how many AA points you got yet. That's not the hard part. The barrier to entry is getting access to the various raid areas, the end zones, as well as getting Bane weapons if you're melee DPS. The gear is just too good in these raid zones to pass up. But that's all. Thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one.